The subcompact crossover segment is one that is always rife with competition, and Kia is no exception. This is the 2024 Kia Seltos SX Turbo. It is the brand's subcompact crossover, and it is the twin to another one that I drove recently from sister company Hyundai. This is Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and I'm here to talk about what they've done to update this 2024 Seltos SX Turbo and see if those updates have made it a little bit better to drive. So let's get into it. So starting up front, you'll notice Kia has done a little bit to tweak the front end. They say that they've just given it a little bit of an update. They've also updated the wheels on this car, and they've given it a new paint color. This is called Pluton Blue. It is one of several really nice color combos on this car. And then moving around back, you'll see you've got a slightly different rear end as well, different taillight treatment in particular. I think it's actually a pretty handsome vehicle overall. Very cute, very good looking, pretty stylish, and generally as new car designs go, I think this will probably age pretty well. And then moving under the hood here of the Seltos SX Turbo, you see the 1.6 liter Turbo 4 that Kia is using. It is up by 20 horsepower this year to 195 horsepower and a matching 195 pound-feet of torque. Now the big deal is what you can't see with the transmission that this all bolts to. That is going to now be an 8-speed torque converter automatic transmission and not a dual clutch. We'll talk about how that affects everything in the driving portion. This is the part that I am most excited about. And as we move inside here, you'll see this is that black interior, but like I said, Kia does offer several other colorways on this car, and they don't limit you to just the top trim level to get the fun stuff. So this one's black, that's what they let you pair to the Pluton Blue, but let's talk about what they've got going on in here that is a little new and different. So the biggest thing that you'll notice here is the screen setup. Now, I'm not a huge fan of screens everywhere, but I do think Kias are pretty well done. So they used to have a regular gauge cluster here with a center screen, just for your trip info, and then over here they used to have just a standalone infotainment screen. You'll see they've moved that to have a more widescreen effect. It's two separate screens between your gauge cluster and your infotainment, but it is their latest version of their software. Everything looks pretty good, very easy to use. This does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but it is wired only. So that is just something that retains from the older models of Seltos. Now looking down here, they've changed up this center stack just a touch, really just small tweaks here. This has single zone climate control. You still have some hard buttons for your infotainment, for your volume, your tuning, your track seek. Really love that. And then looking further down, you do have wireless charging mat, which is actually right up here, and then two USBs. Now, there is a USB-C here for charging, but if you want to use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, that is hardwired over USB-A, so you cannot use a USB-C cord. Not a huge deal, just something to point out. Moving further back, this is all going to be the same as prior Seltoses, Seltai. You got your drive mode dial here, heated seats, your camera button, center diff lock for your all-wheel drive, and downhill hill descent control. Everything else otherwise is going to be pretty familiar. The steering wheel is going to be slightly tweaked as well. They've got that updated Kia logo. Nice hard buttons here, easy to use. Everything in here is pretty easy to figure out. So with all that, I want to talk about this transmission change and see if it made this thing a little bit better to drive. I did drive a first-gen Seltos Turbo, or pre-facelift if you want to call it that, with the dual clutch, and I thought it was fine. It was pretty good. The car's pretty fun and, you know, light on its feet and everything, but it was just a little rough, especially in city driving. So we're here in the city, and let's talk about how this thing drives. So first things first, driving the Seltos, even away from a stop, it is immediately apparent that the torque converter is going to be the better transmission for most people. The way this just takes off from a stop and engages that first gear is just so much better. I think DCTs have been a good idea for the sake of efficiency in particular and higher performance compared to the days of older automatics when we had old 4-speed and 5-speed automatics that were just kind of slow and slushy and really got that slush box term coined in everyone's head. But at this point, modern automatics are so good with torque converters that you don't necessarily need a DCT. A DCT is going to be harder to maintain, more maintenance intensive, more frequent fluid changes, that sort of thing. And you don't necessarily need that when a torque converter auto can slush itself around and be just fine. And you've got 8 gears, and they change gears quicker, they're a little more durable, all of that sort of thing. So around town, I think this does a much better job. I really like it. And again here, away from a stop, just nice and easy. Now it's gonna be slow to shift. This car is not meant to be a performance car. Yes, it's got a turbo, that's just how they give it more performance, more horsepower. If you don't get the turbo, you're gonna be down on power a little bit compared to this one. So definitely nice to have it. And it does feel nice and low-end torquey here when you just kind of rev it right off idle. So like idle to about 3,500 RPM, it feels really strong. The turbo is optimized for that low-end torque. And when you start revving it beyond that, it will start to feel a little more out of breath. Not a terrible thing. It's just one of those little bits where, you know, the turbo can only do one or the other. That's just how turbo cars work. Where do they build power? Where do they help you out? And in this case, they've got it tuned specifically for low end, for city type driving. So this car never feels slow in the city. It actually feels pretty good. When you get on the highway, if you pull out to pass, you're already doing 60, that's when it will start to feel a little bit just slower. Now, the one thing that you might notice even in city driving is that the throttle pedal, the gas pedal, is a little bit laggy. There's a little bit of a delay programmed in. I don't love it even around town at slow speeds, simply because in a true city environment, you're gonna have to give it a little throttle, you know, squirt between traffic here and there, and it can just feel a little not quite ready. So you've got an option here. You can either use the drive mode dial to go to sport mode, or you can just slap the transmission over to its sport mode, and that seems to have the same effect on everything. So not all bad, and that immediately wakes the throttle up and it keeps the transmission in a lower gear. The downside is when you're driving on the highway, you don't necessarily want it in sport because it will lock out that top gear. But if you're just driving around town, you're not going to notice it. It's going to be fine and feel much more punchy. And let's go ahead and hit it down an on-ramp here. Of course, we're in traffic, but we'll see what we can do. I think it's plenty quick. This is going to be fast enough for most people doing most things, and if you're just buying this as a, you know, kind of bop around car, you know, it's not a performance car, but it is plenty quick. Now, the other thing as we're coming up on traffic here, of course, braking is always a big thing that I care about. The brake pedal has really good feel. It's easy, it's predictable, it's very confidence-inspiring. And then suspension is the other thing worth discussing. I mentioned this car is a twin to a Hyundai. It's the twin to the Hyundai Kona. They are related, given Hyundai and Kia are corporate siblings, but doesn't mean they're tuned the same. In fact, they feel tuned quite differently. So I think the Kia rides a little bit better overall. Not to say the Hyundai rides bad, but this is my preference between the two for suspension tuning. So just a little interesting tidbit there, and kind of interesting to compare, even though the point is not to compare the two. But that's my feelings on that. Transmission continues to be a delight. It is much better in sport mode, even in traffic here. It just feels so much better. But if you are okay with a little bit of a delay programmed in, you can put it back to drive and it will all be just fine. And then navigating through traffic and everything, the dash line, the belt line is pretty low in here. I've got good visibility. I really am a fan of that. So it's easy to see. I've got really nice sight lines everywhere. It's a really good city car. And the other nice thing here is just the controls. They're all easy to deal with when I'm not looking. I know there's a big touchscreen and all that, that's fantastic, but I've got plenty of easy access to climate controls, transmission controls, heated seats, that sort of stuff. I can do all this without looking, and that to me is really great. I really wish more companies would emphasize this. Going through this little bend here, the car is, of course, kind of soft. You know, it's got torque vectoring on the all-wheel drive, and it'll do a little bit of, you know, it'll keep up with what you're doing to a point, but this is not a sporty machine. No one's claiming it really is. Yeah, I generally don't have a ton of complaints. I think this is a really good option in the segment. It feels punchy given the turbo. It's well priced. This one is somewhat fully loaded. It's the top trim at $31,000 and change. Now, it does not have the sunroof package because you cannot get that with the two-tone roof. So this has that two-tone paint on the roof. If you get that, you can't get the sunroof, which means you don't get the sunroof, a power tailgate, or ventilated front seats. So if you care about that, you're gonna have to pick a different paint option to get rid of that two-tone. But otherwise, this is pretty well set up. I think it's a lot of car for the money. I like how it drives. I fit well enough in it. You definitely get this sense of sitting on it, not in it, but that's kind of what you get with a car like this. So really not all bad at all. In fact, I quite like it. So thank you for coming along. I know this one's a little bit quicker, a little bit different, but that is how we have to do it some days. So thank you for coming along. Please be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe here, follow us on other socials, and we will see you for the next one.